Welcome to Season 2 of the More You Know Media and Tech Literacy series, produced by Independent Thinker, LLC. The More You Know Media and Tech Literacy series is a quarterly educational initiative that helps individuals and communities better understand the realities of today's digital ecosystem. In episode 14, we cover how to confront the threat of AI dictatorship. Anthropic's red lines are no substitute for public law. We turn the mic to Tommy and Gina for an insightful discussion about this topic.
Take a second, wherever you are right now, and just look at your smartphone.
Or honestly, even just think about it if it's in your pocket.
Right, exactly. Just think about how many incredibly complex, yet entirely frictionless features you interact with every single day. I mean, Face ID unlocking your screen in a fraction of a second.
Autocomplete finishing your sentences before you even really know what you want to type.
Yeah, or an algorithm perfectly curating a feed that just keeps you scrolling. It all feels so seamless. It feels like magic. But what if that friction we are so desperate to engineer out of our lives is actually like the central load-bearing pillar of a functioning democracy?
That is such a huge question because it forces us to look at the very concept of convenience through a completely different lens. We are conditioned by consumer culture to view the elimination of friction as the ultimate good.
Right. Less friction equals better product.
Exactly. But we rarely pause to audit the underlying transaction taking place when we, hand over our agency in exchange for a few saved seconds.
And that hidden transaction is the mission of today's deep dive. We're unpacking a fantastic stack of sources today from Tech Policy Press. They're a nonprofit media organization focused entirely on the collision between technology and democracy.
And the sources are incredibly varied.
Yeah, we've got an essay, a podcast interview, and a live panel discussion transcript, all of them mapping out this intense battle over who gets to write the rules for artificial intelligence and how local communities are pushing back to ensure these systems actually serve the public.
The breadth of these sources is really what makes this deep dive so compelling. We are looking at everything from the ideological philosophies driving global tech conglomerates all the way down to the physical environmental reality of a server farm in a residential neighborhood.
I want to start with the scene set by the essayist David Gant because it perfectly illustrates this whole idea of a hidden transaction. He wrote about his experience as a student in Beijing.
Oh, the facial recognition story.
Yeah, exactly. He talks about how facial recognition over there is no longer a technology you actively decide to use. It's just an ambient feature of the environment.
It's just there.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like he goes to the China Open tennis tournament, walks up to a gate, it scans his face, and immediately points him to his seat. He heads to the airport. A kiosk recognizes him instantly, displays his boarding time.
Didn't he buy tea or something too?
Yes. He buys cold jasmine tea from a street corner vending machine. The door simply unlocks with a glance, and it automatically deducts the cost from his Alipay account. It is the absolute pinnacle of a frictionless commercial ecosystem.
And, the efficiency is undeniable, right? You eliminate wallets, you eliminate physical tickets, lines, all of it. But Gant uses this to highlight a deeply structural problem.
Which is?
The mechanism of frictionless design fundamentally prevents the friction required for critical thought. And by extension, it removes the friction required for democratic consent.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because it feels like the Trojan horse of our era.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. The technology doesn't arrive at the city gates declaring its intention to monitor your every move. It arrives disguised as a helpful assistant that just wants to save you the trouble of carrying a credit card.
Exactly.
And Gant gives some fascinating historical context here from the sources. Look at browser cookies back in 1994. They were literally just meant to save your shopping cart so you didn't lose your items.
Harmless convenience.
Totally. Or Facebook's like button in 2009. Or, look at Azar Raskin's invention of the infinite scroll back in 2006.
That's the one that really gets me.
Yeah, the original engineering goal was purely user experience, just eliminating the physical friction of having to click a next page button so the content flows seamlessly. But fast forward to today, and Raskin publicly calculates that his invention wastes roughly 200,000 human lifetimes every single day.
Because that friction, the act of clicking next page, was actually a crucial cognitive stopping point. It was a moment where the human brain could subconsciously ask, do I want to keep doing this?
Right. It gave you a choice.
Exactly. By removing the friction, you remove the user's agency. And when you scale that up to the societal level, like ambient facial recognition or algorithmic curation, you start to see the democratic danger. None of those ambient technologies were implemented by institutions that the public actually elected.
We just sort of let them in?
We let these technologies embed themselves in our daily routines, and by the time their darker applications reveal themselves, whether that's mass surveillance or behavioral manipulation, millions of people are already entirely dependent on them for their basic daily functioning.
And that dependency creates a massive power vacuum. Lawmakers have historically failed to understand these systems until decades after they are deployed. The sources point out that this void in governance is currently being filled by a phenomenon called reverse regulation.
It's an incredibly potent term. I mean, traditionally, a democratically elected government regulates the private sector, right?
Right.
Reverse regulation flips that dynamic entirely. It's the equivalent of a tenant drafting the lease agreement and dictating the terms to their landlord. Private tech firms are now so powerful, and their proprietary technologies are so essential that they are dictating the terms under which sovereign governments are permitted to operate.
And the starkest example of this from our sources is the recent standoff between the AI company Anthropic and the U.S. Department of Defense. So Anthropic develops a highly capable AI model called Claude. The military and intelligence agencies, obviously, they want to integrate this technology into their systems.
Naturally.
But Anthropic drew two absolute contractual red lines. They flat out refused to allow the Pentagon to use Claude for mass domestic surveillance, and they prohibited its use in powering autonomous lethal weapons.
So you have a private, venture-backed tech startup explicitly telling the United States military what it legally can and cannot do with a weaponized capability.
And the resulting political explosion was massive. The Department of Defense responded aggressively. The Secretary of Defense actually referred to Anthropic as a supply chain risk.
Which is the exact same terminology they use for hostile foreign state entities like Huawei.
Yeah, and there were even threats of invoking the Defense Production Act to force compliance. And I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, we are just neutrally reporting the reactions from both sides here. We're not endorsing either viewpoint. But national security hawks heavily criticized Anthropic for what they called arrogant corporate virtue signaling, arguing that tying the military's hands in an AI arms race endangers the whole country.
While on the other side, civil liberties advocates and AI safety groups praised Anthropic's stance as this essential safeguard against a dystopian surveillance state.
Right. The polarization makes sense because both sides are reacting to a genuine perceived threat. But wait, if the government might misuse AI, isn't it actually a good thing that a tech company is drawing a line in the sand to protect us? It feels like we should be relieved someone is installing guardrails.
This raises an important question. The instinct to applaud those guardrails is completely natural, especially if you happen to agree with Anthropic's specific moral stance. The structural danger, however, is that an unelected corporate boardroom is effectively making unilateral public policy for 350 million Americans. Anthropic holds no constitutional mandate. The public cannot vote out the CEO if the company's normative views shift.
That's a scary thought.
And more importantly, relying on a terms of service agreement as a shield against military overreach is structurally brittle.
Brittle because the financial incentives eventually crush the moral ones, right? The sources actually highlight this with Anthropic's own internal policies. They instituted a framework called a responsible scaling policy.
Yes, the RSP. The concept of an RSP is that a company promises to pause the training of its AI models if the system hits certain dangerous capability benchmarks.
Like what?
Like demonstrating the ability to assist in creating biological weapons or executing autonomous cyber attacks.
But the flaw is that they are the ones grading their own tests. And the sources point out that Anthropic has already watered down their RSP. One of their executives openly admitted that making unilateral safety pauses doesn't make business sense if competitors like OpenAI or Google are just going to blaze past them.
The competitive pressure makes those moral red lines extremely flexible.
Exactly. And when you factor in that Anthropic has a looming IPO that values the company near $1 trillion, the dynamic shifts entirely. The moment company answers to public shareholders, maintaining a costly moral stance that artificially limits lucrative government contracts, well, that's precisely the kind of decision that fiduciary duty disfavors.
Which is why historical context is so vital here. When the Church Committee in the 1970s exposed rampant illegal domestic surveillance by the CIA and the FBI, the solution was not to ask telecom corporations to politely write stricter terms of service.
Probably not.
No, the solution was public outrage translating into public law. It resulted in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, Real, durable civil liberties protections require a statutory process. They require subpoenas, congressional oversight, transparent legal frameworks, not a secret corporate contract that can be quietly amended by a new board of directors on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, if corporate self-governance is structurally doomed by fiduciary duty, then we really have to understand the underlying philosophy that is actively fighting against public law. And this brings us to Paul Nips. He's a veteran European Commission regulator who was instrumental in building Europe's GDPR privacy laws.
Right. He gives a fascinating interview in these sources.
He dissects the fundamental worldview driving Silicon Valley's resistance to regulation. And I wanted to ask you about this. What is that fundamental mindset?
Nintz identifies this deeply unsettling ideology undergirding AI development. It's the belief that human existence and the future itself can be perfectly mathematically calculated and therefore controlled by machines.
He actually quotes former Google CEO Eric Schmidt to illustrate this. Schmidt basically suggested that society simply has to get used to the concept of unexplainable AI, even in high-stakes fields like healthcare.
Which is terrifying.
Right. The tech industry's argument is that neural networks are incredibly complex black boxes by design. If you force the AI to pause and explain its reasoning in a way a human doctor can understand, the computational performance drops.
So they sacrifice transparency for raw power.
Exactly. Schmidt's premise is that even if a machine is making a life-or-death medical diagnosis, and we have literally no idea how it arrived at that conclusion, we must accept it because the math is just statistically superior to human intuition.
And Nintz aggressively dismantles that premise. He does it using both physics and philosophy, which is brilliant. He points out that the belief in a perfectly calculable future ignores Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in quantum physics.
Okay, lay that out for us.
The universe, at its most fundamental level, is probabilistic, not deterministic. You cannot perfectly calculate how a single quantum particle will behave, let alone the infinitely more complex web of human behavior, society, and economics.
Right, because AI models are essentially just prediction engines based entirely on past data. They just regurgitate the past to guess the next word or the next trend.
Exactly. They lack human imagination, they lack our discontent, our dreams, and our ability to envision a paradigm that has never existed before in their training data.
That's a great way to frame it.
Nims argues that yielding our judgment to a black box algorithm is a direct assault on the foundation of the Enlightenment. I mean, the Enlightenment was built on humans demanding reasons, interrogating authority, breaking away from blind obedience. Demanding that society accept the outputs of unexplainable AI is essentially asking us to submit to a new digital religion where the machine's authority is absolute.
Yet the tech lobby's standard defense against regulation is that you cannot pass laws without empirical evidence of harm. They argue that proactive regulation stifles innovation, and lawmakers need to wait and see what actually breaks before intervening.
Which Nims points out is a completely backward paradigm when you're governing exponential technology. He uses a brilliant historical parallel, civilian atomic energy.
Oh, right, after World War II.
Yes, after the devastation of World War II, the global community did not wait for a catastrophic civilian nuclear meltdown to start regulating atomic power.
They didn't need to see a city destroyed by a power plant to know it was dangerous.
Exactly. They established the International Atomic Energy Agency. They drafted strict safety protocols, containment requirements, inspection mandates well before massive civilian reactors were put on the grid, because doing that with AI, waiting for the disaster, invites catastrophe.
But with AI, because the threat is informational and systemic rather than explosive, the industry essentially demands a body count before accepting oversight. And again, just impartially unpacking the guest's arguments here from the source material, Nintz connects this anti-regulatory stance to an ideology often called the Dark Enlightenment.
Right, which is a neo-reactionary philosophical movement popular among certain tech billionaires and right-wing political figures.
The core tenet being that democracy is too messy, too slow, and fundamentally incompatible with rapid technological progress. They actively fight regulation to consolidate oligarchy.
It is a worldview that sees democratic gridlock not as a feature of a free society ensuring consensus, but as a bug in the code that needs to be optimized out.
But this ideology isn't just floating in the cloud as some abstract theoretical debate. It is pouring concrete. It is physically altering the landscape. The thirst for the computing power required to manifest this AI future is having massive tangible impacts right in people's backyards.
Yeah, the term cloud computing is really one of the greatest marketing triumphs of the 21st century. It sounds so ethereal and weightless.
It's just floating up there.
Exactly. But the cloud is actually heavy industrial infrastructure. It is steel, it is sprawling land, and most importantly, it is a staggering consumption of water and electricity.
Which shifts our focus to the panel discussion featuring Dr. Ruha Benjamin and Alejandro Montoya Boyer. They detail how the explosion of AI data centers across the U.S. is sparking intense grassroots opposition that completely crosses traditional demographic lines.
It's uniting people you wouldn't expect.
Totally. You have rural white communities and urban black communities finding themselves fighting the exact same fight against these facilities. The forces cite XAI's operation in Memphis as a prime example, where massive gas turbines were brought in just to power the cooling systems required for their supercomputers.
Just for the cooling systems.
Yes. These facilities drain millions of gallons of local water and place an immense strain on regional power grids.
And the classic corporate justification that these massive infrastructure projects will bring an economic boom and local jobs is frequently a total illusion.
Right.
A billion-dollar AI data center is highly automated. It requires specialized engineers, sure, but it does not employ a massive local workforce. It basically extracts local resources while exporting the immense financial value back to Silicon Valley.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To manage the terrible optics of this extraction, the tech companies engage in these surreal public relations efforts. Dr. Benjamin highlights a Google initiative where they ran a mural challenge.
I could not believe this part.
They literally hired artists to paint beautiful murals on the outside of their massive data centers to make them more aesthetically pleasing to the communities they were draining. It's like putting a fresh coat of green cheerful paint on a bulldozer before it levels your neighborhood.
That is the perfect analogy.
It changes the surface aesthetic, but the internal mechanics, the extraction of power, the environmental toll, the surveillance capabilities housed inside remain completely unchanged.
That bulldozer analogy perfectly captures the disconnect between corporate PR and physical reality. And to combat that bulldozer, Dr. Benjamin introduces a concept she calls ancestral intelligence.
This was the most profound concept in the entire stack of sources for me.
It fundamentally shifts the narrative. We are constantly bombarded with apocalyptic warnings about AI, that it might end the world. Dr. Benjamin argues that instead of panicking, we need to look to communities that have already survived the apocalypses of their own worlds through colonization, displacement, systemic oppression.
Right, they already have the playbook.
Exactly. These communities possess centuries of generational knowledge on how to navigate the collapse of a system, how to build resilience, and how to resist overwhelming external power. We don't just need artificial intelligence, we need to synthesize it with that ancestral intelligence to navigate this current technological shift.
And the sources provide incredible, tangible examples of communities doing exactly that. They aren't just resisting, they are building alternative sovereign infrastructure. Look at Keolu Fox, a scientist in Hawaii who is building what he calls data terrariums.
The mechanics of a data terrarium are fascinating because they completely reject the hyperscale model of Silicon Valley. Instead of relying on a billion-dollar, water-guzzling server farm controlled by Amazon or Microsoft, these are hyper-localized, eco-friendly server networks.
Owned by the community itself.
Yes.
They use recycled GPUs that cost maybe $10,000 rather than billions.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and here's the secret, you don't actually need a massive trillion-parameter foundational AI model to solve local problems.
You really don't.
You don't need the compute power of a Memphis supercomputer to analyze local crop yields or track municipal budgets or manage a regional supply chain. By keeping the compute small and local, the community retains total sovereignty over their own data. It never even enters the corporate ecosystem.
It is technological self-determination. And the anti-eviction mapping project is another brilliant example of this kind of inversion.
Oh, tell the listener about this one.
So typically, the real estate industry uses predictive algorithms to screen tenants, essentially pointing the surveillance lens downward to calculate the risks of a renter based on heavily biased data sets. The anti-eviction mapping project flips the camera.
They point it back up.
Exactly. They use data scraping and mapping technologies to track the behavior of predatory corporate landlords and shell companies, identifying patterns of illegal evictions. They are using the tools of surveillance to monitor the people holding the power rather than the powerless.
That leads right into my absolute favorite example of flipping the lens, which is the white-collar crime early warning system app.
Oh, this is so good.
Predicted policing algorithms have notoriously been used by law enforcement to over-police low-income and minority neighborhoods, basically calculating the probability of street crime. This app brilliantly satirizes that entire industry. You can download it, and it will send you a push notification warning you when you are entering a high-income neighborhood or financial district with a high statistical probability of white-collar financial crimes.
Like tax evasion, corporate fraud, embezzlement.
Exactly.
It pierces the illusion of algorithmic objectivity. It forces the user to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. If AI is truly an objective tool for public safety, why is it exclusively deployed to police marginalized communities and never deployed in corporate boardrooms?
It's such a sharp critique. But, reading through these sources, recognizing the sheer scale of the lobbying money, the physical footprint of the data centers, the depth of the military contracts, it is incredibly heavy. It is very easy to feel paralyzed.
Yeah.
How do you, the listener, process all of this without just succumbing to apathy?
That paralysis is actually a recognized psychological phenomenon. Sources refer to it as the hope gap.
The hope gap.
Right. It is the cognitive distance between the world we want to see, a world of technological justice and democratic oversight, and our internal belief that such a world is actually possible.
Della Wilson's work addresses this directly. She created a virtual reality project called Hope Gap XR. Her father was a veteran civil rights activist who was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the rise of digital authoritarianism. He was literally losing hope. So she built this VR experience not to highlight the problem, but to physically immerse people inside the solutions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the human brain processes virtual reality much like lived physical experience.
Right.
Yeah, so by placing users inside actual functioning reparations initiatives in places like Evanston, Illinois, or land-back programs in New Zealand and Namibia, the VR experience builds new neural pathways. It proves to the brain that structural change isn't just a theory, it is actively happening. It closes the hope gap through experiential evidence.
So for the listener trying to close their own hope gap and take action, Paul Nintz breaks it down into 3 actionable tiers. The first is the micro level. This is entirely within your control. It's an audit of your personal tech choices. What permissions are you blindly accepting? What data are you treating for convenience? What systems are you allowing your kids to normalize in their daily routines?
Right, it's about reclaiming personal friction. The second tier is the environmental level. This expands to your immediate sphere of influence, your workplace, your local school board, your neighborhood association.
The places where you actually have a voice.
Exactly. Are they adopting experimental AI screening tools without questioning the vendor? Can you be the person in the room advocating for open source, transparent alternatives? Or maybe demanding data terrariums instead of corporate cloud contracts?
And finally, the political level. This is the rejection of reverse regulation. It means engaging with civil society organizations and demanding that lawmakers establish statutory frameworks like the AI Civil Rights Act discussed in the panel, rather than relying on those brittle corporate scaling policies. Nintz argues the ultimate goal here is to foster a generation of engineers for democracy.
Citizens who are equally fluent in the code of the machine and the constitutional code of human rights, because the code of the machine will dictate the architecture of our future society.
So what does this all mean? We began by looking at the seamless ambient magic of facial recognition and frictionless design. But if we want to preserve our agency, we have to recognize that convenience as a Trojan horse. We must reject the paradigm where unelected tech executives act as a reverse regulator for sovereign nations. We must demand explainability and refuse to submit to the blind religion of algorithmic prediction.
And most crucially, we have to look to grassroots, community-led innovations.
Yes. Ancestral intelligence, data terrariums, flipping the surveillance lens. We have to ensure that technology remains a tool that serves humanity, rather than a system humanity is forced to serve.
And, looking at the sheer physical footprint required to run these systems leaves us with one final, deeply provocative twist to ponder, which is completely built on these sources.
What's that?
We spend an immense amount of time and anxiety debating the abstract. We worry about whether AI will eventually outsmart us in the cloud, or whether a gridlocked federal government will ever pass meaningful tech regulation. But if these AI models inherently require massive, unavoidable physical infrastructure, billions of dollars in real estate, the draining of millions of gallons of municipal water, and an unprecedented strain on local power grids. Does that mean the ultimate, most effective democratic check on digital authoritarianism won't come from a federal courtroom or a UN treaty?
Where would it come from?
Simply from the zoning board, the utility commission, and the engaged citizens in your local town hall?
Wow, that is a staggering reframing of where true power actually lies. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, embrace the friction, and we'll see you next time.
For more episodes related to media, social media, tech, and privacy, visit our YouTube channel, Independent Thinker LLC.